I'm really delighted to be here because, first of all, I have not been to Chicago and I haven't visited before the Field Museum. It's my first time, so I'm excited that Dr. Martin will show us around the museum after the lecture. So, as Dr. Martin told you, I work on various aspects of human evolution, from geology to paleontology, paleoanthropology. And today I will speak about a major discovery, but as again he told you, I'm not interested just in finding, but I'm really interested in the context also. So what I will try to do today is to put that discovery, very important discovery, in the context of what we do when we are not only paleontologists, but even also when we are naturalists. So I'll try to do that today. And you can believe me, I'm not going to speak about cows. There is a hominid here, by the way. And I think it's important to, first of all, thank all the people and the institutions who made my work possible and who have contributed for me to be here in front of you. And this includes permission, collaboration, assistance, and funding and support. So thank you to all of them. When I think of my work, I see it as follows. I'm interested on the anatomy, how it changes through time and space, the environment, and how these two are linked, and then how this context affects us. And of course, more recently, how this affects us. For a long time, this was affecting us. Now we are affecting it the other way around. So I'm interested in the link between the two. Just to give you a background, today when we speak of hominids or hominins, they are synonymous for this purpose. We have this framework of our family tree, as we know it from the fossil record. Very early hominins of Australopithecus or in Ethiopian maybe hominins. Then we have a diversity of species here, and then that goes to Paranthropus and Homo. So if you ask me what would be the big questions today as to our family and its past, it's questions about the origin of the various species and lineages during this time period, whether we have indeed a diversity of species here, or, as Sam suggests, we can lump all of this into one species, and we have a single line going from Ethiopian to an afarensis, and then maybe Homo. And of course, what is the phylogenetic relationship among these various species, and what type of ecological context was all this diversity, if it exists, and the origin of species or lineages was happening or taking place. So you can call this the major questions that we have in the present time period that I'm interested in. And today I'll be speaking about an individual which belongs to Australopithecus afarensis. So we are sometime around here, just for you to know that. But when you try to deal with phylogeny, origins, diversity, we are faced with one major obstacle, and that is the very fragmentary nature of the fossil record. Not only are the fossils we find fragmentary, but the evidence itself is fragmentary. We have today, for example, Australopithecus garhi, Australopithecus Bahar-Ghazali, Kenanthropus platyops, Paranthropus aethiopicus, 4 species of early hominin that are represented by simply a single skull, if not a fragment of jaw. But hard work of analyzing something like this and working hard, we can go from here to here. And this is thanks to my colleagues Kimball, Yorak, and Johansson. And If you don't believe me, you have here the lower jaw. This is the condyle, and that is this one. The part of the maxilla is somewhere around here, I think, and that is this part. So hard work in laboratories can take you from the fragmentary evidence to something like this. So if the fragmentary nature of the fossil record is critical, then when you find something like this, it means it's very important. And as you can see, this is not a fragment of a face or a skull. You have the face, all the milk teeth, the lower jaw, the ribs. Here is the glenoid cavity of the scapula, even the endocast in the form of sandstone impression. And then we also, by the way, I just separated 3 months ago. This is a new picture. This lower jaw, and you can see it here. So we had access for the first time to the inside of this individual. And then further study revealed the presence of the foot. These are the metatarsals, the tibia. This is the flexed femur and tibia, another tibia, humerus, ribs, and a fragment of scapula, etc. So what is this? This is the earliest child, you can call it. It's the earliest and most complete skeleton of a 3-year-old girl who lived about 3.3 million years ago and belongs to the species known as Australopithecus afarensis, which is a Lucy species. It was found by my research team back in 2000 in an area called Kika, which is in the northeastern Ethiopia. And it was published, as Dr. Martin mentioned, as a cover page of Nature. So in theory, if you're on the cover page of Nature, that means you're something important, extraordinary, new. I hope it's always the case. So after we announced our discovery like this was followed by a huge amount of media, which goes from the New York Times, Washington Post, National Geographic, Financial Times, etc., etc. Even a gold coin was minted. So the question is, why would be interested in terms of the public and then the scientific aspect in this specimen? Why is that? Why do we have this all? And today, my job will be to try to convince you there is a very good reason. But before that, I think we need to put things in context. Today, the DNA analysis of living chimpanzees and humans tells us that we are very closely related, and we diverged sometime around 7 million years ago. But of course, what DNA does not tell us is what was happening after the divergence here. So for us people interested in the fossils, we are simply trying to fill in the gap and see the different stages of development of our past. And then when you find something like Selam or Lucy, you would be filling in here the gap, then Ardipithecus would be here, Garhi would be here, etc. Within that framework, I think we need to ask, so if this is the case, what are really the big questions that paleoanthropologists are interested in? I think it's important to give a short review of that so that we can weigh against the significance of the discoveries that I'm going to talk about. We are interested in the morphology of our ancestors, how they look like, and how that look changes through time. So anatomy. We are interested in their behavior through time and how changed and sometimes ended up in this way or in this way. Anyway, that behavior could be in form of whether we have stone tools or not, whether we are aggressive or not, whether we are kind or not. So what were the behavioral attributes over time that characterize our ancestors, in addition, of course, to the anatomy or morphology I mentioned first. And then ontogeny is the change that you have as you grow older, you change. And of course, when you work on fossils, you find an individual, and it doesn't give you how that individual passed from one stage of development to the other. So ontogeny, which is growth and development, in other words, is important to understand. So things change as you grow old, and if for the best or for the worst, you don't look like when you are a child, and that is important because if you reported only the adult individuals, then that means you're biased, you're completely ignoring the children. So understanding ontogeny is one big important question in paleoanthropology. And then of course locomotion, whether they were runners, our ancestors were runners, climbing trees, quadruped, etc. So in addition to anatomy, behavior, ontogeny, locomotion is also one important aspect of the questions that we would like to understand. And of course, all that takes place in an environment, could be New York City or the savannah or this reconstructed paleo environment of Australopithecus afarensis. So understanding the environment and context is very crucial. And when you do that, you have access to the forces and mechanisms of all the changes that you see through time. So it's by combining the understanding of the anatomy, the behavior, ontogeny, environment, that you can then have access to the forces and mechanisms that are driving forces of what's happening over time. But of course, as you all know, these questions of anatomy, behavior were out there for years and years, so I'm not the one who formulated those questions. They were out there. So when, like many of you, some of you here myself, when you are working in the field or in your laboratory, you need to have a specific question that you'd like to address on the intended work that you'd like to accomplish. I cannot go to the field and say, okay, I'll study the behavior. You cannot do that. You have to have a specific question, and that's what I did after the completion of my PhD in Paris in '98. I went to Ethiopia and started my multidisciplinary and international research group, where at the beginning I was the only researcher, so it was not really international. But I will show you why I say that. Anyway, this is Hadar where Lucy was found. And this is Dikika where Salam was found. The scientific name of Salam, by the way, is DIK1-1. That's the inventory number and belongs to the species Australopithecus afarensis. So since I knew what was going on in Hadar, the question I had was very simple. What was happening before the times of Lucy? And to do that, you see this white band here is a volcanic ash dated to 3.4 million years ago before present. And all the fossils from Hadar were found above this volcanic ash, so that means they are younger than 3.4 million years. So finding something here would clearly show that would enable us to ask questions of paleoanthropology, paleontology, paleoenvironment, geology, stratigraphy of sediments that are older than 3.4. So that is the very first question that took me to this site of Dikika. But of course, as I told you when I started, this was my research team, and here is Denis Gerard, who was my former advisor, and we expanding. Particularly, you can see after 2001, we grew faster, and that was after the discovery of Salam. But I have to acknowledge many of my colleagues. This is a multidisciplinary project in which a geologist, paleontologist, specialist of GIS and micro mammals, and the paleoenvironment are involved. So all these people work hard in collaboration to the locals, of course, to make things happen. Well, to just give you an idea of where it is, here is Ethiopia, Dikika is right here, Egypt is here, Saudi Arabia is here, there is the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, Indian Ocean. And if you have a close-up, here is Dikika, Hadar is here, where Lucy is from, Gona, where the first stone tools are from, Middle Awash, where the many earliest Ethiopian hominin fossils were discovered. So when you combine all that, actually, it gives you what is popularly known as the cradle of mankind. And as you can see, Dikika is right in the heart of the cradle of mankind. luckily for me. In short, working in these places is very hard, and it goes from this type of problems to making roads and everything. To just tell you briefly, I was doing this back in 1999, and I was the first person to actually drive a car to the spot where Saddam was found. So, simply to tell you that it's difficult to work there. And the Dakika Hill, which is this conspicuously pointed hill, is after which the project is named. And basically, we spend 2 months right in the middle of nowhere. And when we go there, we carry a village with us. There is nothing waiting for us. There is no permanent camp. Okay. If you look at the Horn of Africa, you have the great East African Rift Valley here. And many of the fossils almost exclusively come from here, of course, in addition to South Africa. And I'm sure at some point you've asked yourself, why is this happening? There are 4 reasons. This spot is right here. And you have the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the main Ethiopian rift. And this is called the triple junction because 3 rift systems connect here. And this is what is called the Afar Depression. If you went to this place today, it's a desert environment. But 3, 4, 5 million years ago, this region was covered with forests, trees, rivers, lakes. So one reason is that the area was very favorable for the flourishment of our ancestors. That's one reason. Second, because we had the lakes and the rivers, the area was a sedimentary basin where the remains of our ancestors, including the many animals, were being deposited. So in addition to being favorable for the survival of our ancestors, it was also favorable for the preservation of their remains. And finally, subsequent tectonic activities, such as uplifting, faulting, and subsidence, have exposed the old rocks that were buried 5 to 6, 4, 3 million years ago. And then when you go there, what you find are these old sediments buried millions of years ago. Of course, to this, if you added the hard work of many of my colleagues and myself going to this harsh place and spend months and months, combining 4 of these reasons makes this place to be paleoanthropological paradise, I could dare to say. Okay, once you're there, this is what you have. So, you can see earlier I was telling you about the volcanic ash dated to 3.4 million years, and you can see it here. It's very widespreadly present. And if you're above, you're younger, below, you're older. So, since I was the only scientist in 99 and 2000, I was just using this as a reference. So when we found Salam right here, I knew already that indeed I was not far off from the date 3.4 million years. But even though this seems to contain nothing, the close-up clearly shows you that there are things indeed. A monkey which is still intact, you can see the frontal here, and the brain casings. An elephant cranium. This is the foramen magnum, the hole at the base of your skull. Here are bones of elephants, and here is the lower jaw of a pig, and here is that volcanic ash, 3.4 million years ago. So East Africa in this regard is really very good and gives us the opportunity to actually date while working, while excavating the sediments. So these fossils, of course, are very important when we try to understand the ancient type of environment that prevailed during those days. And it's thanks to the species, actually, we have some idea, in addition to other methods, of course, of the paleo environment in which our ancestors evolved. Okay, so that was, in a way, the background of my work. So it was while doing the same work of surveying this very vast place, over 500 square kilometers, that on this day, the 10th of December, I decided to explore this hillside And my team was this: 2 soldiers, a ministry representative, and myself. So we started surveying at about 5 p.m. We spotted something, which is this one right here. But of course, you should put in mind that we've been finding things here, non-human fossils, pigs, elephants, monkeys, etc. here. So I'm just speaking only about that moment. So this should be put in the context of months and months of research. So when we found her, or it then, because we didn't know what it was, when we found it, the eye sockets were covered, and you have something here. It seems nothing. But what is here is a twisted spinal column, you can see, and I'll show you later. These are the ribs, and they are squashed against the base of the skull here. So if you're here, if you have this volcanic ash, if you're sure that your fossils are in situ, then you can already have some idea about the age, which is what I did. Of course, we continued to sieve and screen at that spot. And then this took 4 successive years between 2000 and 2004. We went from the spot where we discovered the first skull all the way up to 200 meters below. And we were basically doing this for months and months, and we screened the whole hillside. And we were successful in recovering. Here is the femur, tibia, complete foot with all the metatarsals and the tarsals buried here. This is the distal tibia coming from above. This is the distal fibula. You have the calcaneus here. And then still tibia and femur, which are in articulation, fingers, and etc. Part of the frontal bones. And if you want to see what comes from where, this is the major distribution of the elements, and I have asked my colleagues to point to the skeletal element when they So here my colleague is pointing to his skull, telling me the skull came from there, and Eric, my colleague from University of Texas, is pointing to the knee comes from there, and you have some idea of the distribution. Only of the major elements. And everything belongs to the same individual. Remember, I showed you the reconstruction of that very fragmentary fossil by Bill Kimball. Normally, that is what paleoanthropologists face. It's so fragmentary, they have to glue it together. Here, the challenge I had was the other way around. It's so together that I had to separate it. And you can see here the ribs, the clavicles, the scapula, and everything is just. And this picture, compared to the one I showed you at the beginning, you saw nothing, but this is what happens after 4 years of cleaning and preparation. So that's one evidence for the fact that it's one individual, but also when you compare the different skeletal elements, you can see that it's not completely fused here. You can see it here also, it's not completely fused. And this is because it's a juvenile individual like this one. And moreover, we have the same type of matrix on this bones and on the main block. So that clearly shows that it belongs to the same individual. And this is like a before and after image. You have this as it was discovered, I showed you earlier, and you have a very beautiful spinal column. That's beautiful for us anyway. I'm sure Dr. Martin will agree. And you have ribs here, and you don't have the eyes here, and you have the eyes here, etc. And I showed you the lower jaw at the beginning, now it's separated. And this is after 5 years. The hyoid bone, I will talk about in a minute, is deep in there. And it's a tiny bone, but I was able to extract the hyoid bone from here. Also, we have applied technology that is available today, the CT scanning technology, which actually helps you look what is inside the mouth. And when you do that, this picture is here, CT scanning, and you can see the baby teeth here on the original, which you have here, but you don't see the teeth here, but they are inside, hiding. And my colleague Fred Spoor, who is a specialist of the inner ear, actually managed to extract the inner ear, which is in red here, using this technology. So this whole process took almost 6 years after the discovery, because we found the salam in 2000 that was not published until September 2006. Okay. So with that, all information that comes from the preliminary description, from the seed scanning, etc., we were able to establish that this individual was an upright walking, and this is because of the anatomies on the femur, including the bicondylar ankle, the very sharp anterior keel of on the tibia, and when you see here on the original, the foramen magnum is actually more forwardly located or anteriorly positioned. So the individual is a biped, that means we belong to our family tree. But not everything was human-like. We have the scapula, which is gorilla-like. This is the hyoid bone, and this is only, I think it's 5 millimeters. It's tiny little bone with a chip-like, and the fingers are long and curved. So even though there are many features showing that this individual was a biped and hence a hominin, there are features that are ape-like also on the same skeleton. So earlier, I told you that one of the important questions were to understand how we look like, how they look like, so the anatomy. So when you see at this face, you clearly see that Australopithecus afarensis, when juvenile, looked like that 3.5 million years ago. And this is a huge addition to our knowledge of the infants of this time period. And we can say that because this is a chimpanzee. You see the absence of a forehead here because the frontal squama is more receding because of the presence of the postorbital sulcus here. You don't have that in the tongue child, and you don't have that in this individual also, as is the case in humans, represented by George Bush. So this of course is related to the development of the prefrontal cortex, etc. But this is to say that these features are clearly hominin features. In addition, if you look at the canine here of a chimpanzee, which is edged similarly, it's very pointed and long. This is what you have here, a tiny canine, which is a human character also. And I can continue citing features like that. But this clearly is answering a huge answer of the anatomy or the morphology, which is one of the big questions I outlined at the beginning. So understanding the morphology of the juvenile individuals is really very critical. So one question answered. Of course, when you have a baby, what you do is to know the sex first. And is this a girl or a boy? How do we know? Okay, this is the original of salam. And you have the baby teeth, the milk teeth. This is the canine, this is the DM1, and the DM2 is inside the canine, the DM1, DM2, which are the deciduous dentition, the milk teeth or the baby teeth. So you see nothing here, but with the seed scan technology I showed you earlier, you can go deep here and see this. This is what is hiding inside. And you have the molar, which is a permanent molar, the P4 still developing, P3s, and the canine. And I should remind you that in primates, there is this phenomenon called sexual dimorphism, which simply means males are larger than females and males have large canine teeth than females. And this was the case for Australopithecus afarensis. So when we measure the size of the adult canine tooth, it fell within the range of the variation for female individuals in Australopithecus afarensis. And that's how we know this individual was a girl. And to know how old this individual was when she died, we used models of the chimpanzee. And again, with the CT scan, you can estimate how much time would be required to accumulate this amount of teeth in humans and chimpanzees. And we did the same for this individual. So when you do an estimate, an informed estimate based on the knowledge we have, an age of 3 seemed appropriate. So this individual who lived 3.3 million years ago was a girl and died when she was about 3. In addition to understanding the anatomy, the morphology of the juveniles, one important question I mentioned as big questions was understanding behavior was critical when you deal with ancient hominin species. And thanks to this fossil, we have the endocast. And here it is after CT scan, and you can clearly remove the skull, and you can measure the brain size of this individual, and it was about 330 cc, which is small, but not very different from that of a chimpanzee. And this is not a surprise, because Australopithecus afarensis had a slightly larger brain size than chimpanzee. But what was interesting was when we did a proportional estimate compared to the adult values in Australopithecus afarensis, it was relatively small. In other words, at age 3, chimpanzees would have formed over 90% of their brain. That's why they can cope up with their environment easily. But in this case, it was less than 90%. But not very different. But the patterns seem a little bit human-like, which is strange for a species of this antiquity. So we think maybe if the brain at birth was really small, maybe this species, the juveniles of this species required care from their parents. That's why we depend more on our parents, because our brain is very small at birth compared to other great apes. But of course, this will have to wait further analysis in terms of the determination of the age of days, and the brain pattern of many species is not well understood. In addition to the anatomy and the behavior, I told you locomotion was also one critical question that we'd like to address. And again, Salam helps us talk about locomotion. This is what we had from Lucy, and this is the scapula, the shoulder blade. I was surprised to see that it was very gorilla-like, because you would expect it at least human-like or chimp-like, because we are closely related to the chimpanzees and the gorillas. So the fact that we had a gorilla-like scapula, you can see the supraspinous is really similar to that of a gorilla. The same here. It's tiny here. Anyway, there are features that are subtle, and they come out when you do statistics, actually. So, of course, interpreting this primitive or ape-like features is really complicated. Some will tell you they're just primitive retentions from the common ancestor. And others will say, no, they were there for a purpose. I think the many features, ape-like features that we have on Australopithecus afarensis upper part of the skeleton are probably telling us that Australopithecus afarensis did some tree climbing. And this is a highly debated question, and we are contributing to understanding the locomotor behavior of afarensis, in addition to the behavior of afarensis, in addition to the anatomy of afarensis, in addition to the degree of development of pattern of the dentition of afarensis. This is really exciting, because the hyoid bone was not known at all from this time period. We had only one hyoid bone from a Neanderthal, the Cadara specimen. When I found this was 2 years ago. When I was cleaning, I did not really expect to find this, but when I saw this, it was really exciting. And let me ask you a very simple question. Do you think this looks like this one or like this one? Or left or right? Right. And this is a chimpanzee. So the morphology of the hyoid bone in this individual is very ape-like, chimpanzee-like. And this, can you hear me?
No.
No?
It's not connected. We lost.
Can you hear me now?
No.
Can you hear me now?
No. Go to the podium.
Now?
Use the podium.
I can use this. Okay, I will use this. No problem. So, okay, now? Yes, okay. So, this is the hyoid bone, and it's above your larynx. And it's proposed that in a way it contributes to this region is a vocal tract, so it controls the type of voice you produce. Of course, I did say here, did she speak? I think we should not even think of talking about language simply based on this morphology, because language is, of course, the anatomy that you have, that's something in the brain also. So we need to combine our understanding of both the brain and the morphology. But the fact that you have this deeply excavated hairy bone may be telling us that there might have been air sacs as in great apes, African great apes. And that might mean that the type of voice produced by this species would have been more that of chimpanzee-like than human-like. So this was really another exciting surprise to find that the hairy bone was very chimp-like in Australopithecus afarensis. Okay, so coming close to the end, and all the points I mentioned, the voice, the anatomy, the behavior, the locomotion, now clearly demonstrate that indeed this skeleton helps us address aspects of almost all big questions in paleoanthropology, and that basically shows why it is important. But in addition, what you have here, this is a sketch by myself to simply show what is preserved and what is not. And compared to this, who is 40% complete, we have a 60%, if not more, complete skeleton. But in addition, we have a face, which we were missing in Lucy, for example. And this face clearly documents the anatomy of the face and how these ancient creatures look like. So that we have all the skeleton in addition to previously unknown elements, such as the hairy bone and then the scapula, is giving us a new, is opening a new research avenue to talk about many of the critical questions in paleoanthropology. So I will conclude by briefly summarizing the significance and conclusions of this specimen. First of all, you all know this word. Yes, missing link. Because when you were a paleoanthropologist and go to field find something, to ask you, so have you found the missing link? I think the notion of missing link is really interesting if you are interested only in the progression and change of species through time. I think in my view, there was something big missing. The children were missing. And with the discovery of Saddam, we are feeling in a way this gap. And that's really a big gap. And to summarize the significances, we have questions that we have addressed on our preliminary work already, and that includes the anatomy of the face, locomotor repertoire of Australopithecus afarensis, the behavior thanks to the brain, the voice thanks to the hairy bone, and the paleo-environment, of course, thanks to the associated fauna or animals. And in the future, big questions such as body proportion, we will be able to address for the first time in early hominin juveniles. But that will require complete cleaning and preparation of the fossil. And change stream of the genetic development by comparing the juveniles with the adults. We can talk now how each feature on the face or on the skeleton will change as they grow older. And that's called morphology. So actually at this level, this is the only aspect that we were not able to address based on our preliminary work because it requires more data. And then the body planning of early hominin children in stature, for the first time we will be able to know at age 3, Australopithecus afarensis individuals who are this high. But that will require further research. And then detailed analysis of dental development patterns using recently developed techniques, we will be able to talk about life history of the species of Australopithecus afarensis. So in a nutshell, what we have here is this individual captures a critical moment in an individual's life, of course, but it's also capturing a history, a moment in the life history of the species Australopithecus afarensis, I think. And the mosaic of features on the life. Ape-like, human-like features I showed you clearly show that things are changing slowly, progressively, and evolutionary in the making. And then finally, I would as was the case with Lucy, I think this individual will play a critical role in paleoanthropology and the role of anthropology in the problem. And finally, while I was doing my research, somebody was busy looking for the Salam's report card, and they found it. And somebody sent me where she went to school and preschool, and they managed to find the picture, and you have some grades and categories and level, and you can read something here. Anyway, I was happy that they said Leakey is another morphologist in a bright and very social hominid, and it's a pleasure to have her in our classes. Yeah, that's very good, and I'm really pleased to have found her and to be able to share my excitement with you all. Thank you.